It's easy to feel dismissive about Sony's latest cinema camera because naturally, we've seen superior cinema cameras from Sony before, and now this joins the lineup as the new little guy. So in terms of expectations, the FX30 is very much overshadowed. Now, ethics disclosure, this review is not sponsored by Sony, this is an independent review. But it needs to be said that separate from this independent review, I am involved in Sony's launch campaign for this camera. That being said, despite my promotional involvement, I'm not gonna pretend like this is the best cinema camera in the world because let's be real, this is the cinema line's entry-level model. But this would also mean that this is the most affordable option in Sony's cinema lineup by quite a margin. Just to be clear, I do not consider this a bad camera at all, it's actually incredibly capable, but ourselves as users, we tend to always start off a bit skeptical when we hear of a price-friendly camera, because that usually means there's a huge handicap and somewhere some features are being limited or not made available on purpose. That is not the case with the FX30. But first, let's address the elephant in the room. This looks very much like a camera we've definitely seen before, but in a Super 35 format. In terms of capabilities, it is, to this camera's credit, very similar as well. Remember the firmware version 2 update for the FX3 that introduced a whole plethora of features to it like Cine EI and LUT support? Well, perks of being a member of the Cinema Line family, the FX30 gets all of that, including compatibility with the external timecode accessory. Really, aside from this being Super 35 and not full frame, there's nothing that Sony held back on the FX30. They've thrown in everything they could. This is a 4K 10-bit 422 machine that can shoot up to 120p in 4K. It's shooting on a new sensor, and the 4K is oversampled from 6K, so it's very sharp and detailed. There is no cropping even at 4K 60p. It's only in 120p slow-mo, where there's a 38% crop according to Sony. You can push your slow-mo shots up to 240p if you shoot in full HD. Also, everything you're seeing in this video was shot on the FX30, including this talking head. I'm being filmed by another FX30 right now, so this video is pure FX30 footage. Speaking of that, this is quite pure of a video camera as well because this does not have a mechanical shutter. But if you insist, this technically can shoot 26 megapixel stills. If you insist. But back in the video world where this camera belongs, the sensor can capture you around 14 stops of dynamic range in S-Log 3. I absolutely love that focus breathing compensation is present on this camera. Of course, there's your Cine EI modes, there's a Cine tone, you get display LUTs, as well as the ability to import your own LUTs, also PP LUTs, which means the look from your LUTs gets baked directly into the footage as if they're picture profiles. When shooting in S-Log 3, this does get the dual base ISO treatment. You get a low base of 800 and high base of ISO 2500. You get tally lamps when you're rolling, there's active cooling built in, it runs off FZ100 batteries, it has dual card slots that can receive both SD and CF Express Type A cards, and very importantly, a full-sized HDMI output. So that was quite a mouthful indeed, but this camera is absolutely packed full of features. Like I said, there's nothing being crippled here on the FX30. Still, for those who are already accustomed to the rest of the cinema line, then these features probably don't sound like anything groundbreaking. But that's because this camera is less of Sony trying to showcase their cutting-edge capabilities and more of them taking a range of products that would otherwise be quite out of reach for much of the aspiring crowd and making it accessible. When you think about it from the perspective of that aspiring crowd, then the FX30 really makes a lot of sense. This is incredibly welcoming for, say, the aspiring cinematographer to realistically get their hands on a cinema camera which they can actually feasibly own. While I was working on content for the FX30, I just kept thinking about how incredibly excited I would have been if something like this existed when I was just starting out with cinema cameras. I remember my first cinema camera costed twice as much as this, and it was an 8-bit full HD camera with no slow-mo capabilities, and it wasn't even that long ago. As you can see, I'm not really that old myself, I think. And for me, one of the huge pluses of getting the FX30 over a mirrorless camera outside of the cinema line is the fact that you can access the Cine EI workflow on a camera in this price range. Once you get used to it, it's really hard to go back to shooting S-Log without Cine EI because having the ability to see in camera what your footage looks like after you push or pull it it spoils you. And because this shares the same physical design as the FX3, it also uses the same XLR audio handle, but Sony's actually offering quite a bit more flexibility specifically with the FX30 because there is actually now an option to purchase this without the audio handle for $400 less. For my local Malaysian market, that's a price difference of nearly 2,000 ringgit. For someone who's just starting out, those savings could really mean a lot going towards a new lens to use with this. Now, pricing's never quite final until launch, and I'm filming this pre-launch, but we should be looking at a retail price of roughly $1,800 for an FX30 without the audio handle. So quite clearly, this is intended for the entry-level market. It's almost like an entry ticket into Sony's cinema line. This is not likely to be your end game, but it comes with everything you need to get started and then some. So for anyone looking to get started with filmmaking, this is one to consider. And this has been the FX30. If you enjoyed this video, maybe I'll see you in another one.